say that making infrastructure disaster resilient, for example, may cost even as low as 2 to 3%. And if it costs as low as 2 to 3% extra, then what is the role of these funds and how should they be used to leverage what is done? Now, in the case of Mexico, since that's the one example that is available, what they try to do is to actually, instead of the mitigation fund, they use the response fund in a manner that tries to incentivize states to build resilience. So if the state does not take into account, in this case, actually, they make this, it is compulsory for the states to buy insurance, and if the states don't buy that insurance because it's too expensive, because they haven't taken the steps to take risk reduction measures, then in the first disaster, while 100% will be paid, in the second one, 50% will be paid by the center, and in the third case of a reoccurring of the disaster, the center will pay nothing. So if you think of a state in India that regularly has floods, for instance, each time this would put pressure on the state to take steps to actually build resilience. I'm not saying that this is the mechanism that will work in India, but simply saying that, one, we have the option of having a mitigation fund, a small mitigation fund, figuring out how to use that fund, whether to use it for reconstruction, whether to use it for, ask states for their plans to build resilience, and then to allocate that money to leverage it to somehow help them, or alternatively, or maybe both, not necessarily alternatively, but both, is also to use the response fund in such a manner that we build in incentive mechanisms. Of course, this raises the question, should the incentives and pressure be coming entirely from the center? I believe that the pressure will be more political. If you hear about stories success stories about where Japan or other places where disaster risk resilience has been a major focus, it's not pressure from somebody else, but pressure from the people itself, which elected representatives respond to by putting money in place. But usually that doesn't happen, and the focus is on recovery, because recovery is visible and resilience is not visible. But those are some of the issues that we need to think about and grapple with, because for us at this stage, India is going to be building, we are urbanizing very fast. 2/3 of the population in the next 15 years will be living in urban areas. We are going to be building perhaps the largest share of the world's new infrastructure. We are going to be building all kinds of social, physical infrastructure, which will all require huge amounts of investment, and we need to worry about what are the mechanisms we put in place to make that create less risks and make us more resilient rather than to create new risks. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that eloquent exposure. Obviously, one can say that India has come quite a way ahead in terms of dealing with disaster management, but I think a lot more needs to be done, and Professor Ila Patnaik did allude to the various kinds of incentives, fiscal and others, that one should think in terms of to bring that as a policy framework at the state level and at the central level. So let me now ask Dr. Binoy Acharya to make comments.
Good morning. Esteemed members in the House, Chair Mr. Vishwanathan, Co-Chair Professor C.V.R. Murty, my fellow panelist Professor Ila Patnaik and Ms. Alpa. I'm happy to talk about role of panchayats in building resilience. And yesterday when Mr. Piparsania, the Chief Secretary Assam, he talked about how he went down to the village and tehsil level. That reconfirms my point. And also, I had a discussion with OSDMA, Kamalochanji, and the kind of work they have been doing, that also reconfirms what I'm going to talk about. This is too tall for me. What I'm going to talk here is primarily coming from my last 25 years of experience of moving around India and working with both government, PRIs, and civil society. And some of the cases I'm going to present here are my own engagement. Also, they have been presented in NDMA in previous meetings. And I'm also happy here that this national platform has taken up PRI as one of the main agenda, because this is the 25th year of 73rd Amendment. 92, we have the 73rd Amendment. Now 25 years of we have experience of panchayats, active engagement of panchayats. So I'm glad that this became a theme in the national platform. When I talk about role of panchayats, in fact, both our DM policy, DM Act, very clearly talks about involvement of local agencies, which is basically Panchayat and Nagarpalika. And there is a formation talk about Village Disaster Management Committee. And if you look at all government public programs, everybody has a committee at the grassroots level. In fact, the VDMC, I'll call it GPDMC. It's Gram Panchayat level actually, but it's termed as V, but it's GP, Gram Panchayat. So all practical purpose. And if you look at the last 15, 20 years of engagement of panchayats, in fact, confirms Sendai framework. They have been engaged in disaster risk analysis. I'll give an example. One panchayat which has most number of houses are thatched houses, and they had fire every year. They did the analysis and they found out that all the fires have broke out after 12 noon. So they made a policy saying that no cooking, even if the eminent guests are coming to the family, there should not be any cooking. After that, their fire incidents are considerably reduced. Look at the local level insights, the analysis they do about the hazard and the kind of action they take. So there's not enough water, all thatch houses, what they can do? They can only regulate it. So a lot of self-regulation has been happening. And so my point is all the 4 priorities panchayats are practicing. Broadly, if you look at, after the DM Act and DM plans, most of the PRIs have been doing their DM plans. In fact, if I look at Gujarat, every panchayat has made that DM plan. And those DM plans are very well made. Of course, they require revision, but DM plans are well made. And in Gujarat earthquake, I think everybody should read that policy plan document. In fact, after every disaster, we have been circulating that policy plan. It's a very small, some 16-page document, but the end, it talks about the key principles. And one of the principles is invoking the instrumentality of Gram Sabha in planning the rehabilitation work. I think this is one of the fantastic. It came in 2001. So, invoking the instrumentality of Gram Sabha is very important. I'll also tell one thing, after 14th Finance Commission, Professor Ila Patnaik has already mentioned about it. the 14th Finance Commission has given substantial amount of resources to Gram Panchayats directly. You know, we have about 250,000 panchayats in India, and 14th Finance Commission has given about 200,000 crore to panchayats for 5 years, 15 to 20. And out of that, the basic grant is 180,000 crore. Of course, the incent performance is under 10%. But the GPTP, this is a Gram Panchayat Development Plan, is talking about that how panchayat will do their own plans. But unfortunately, there is no guidance from MOPR, Minister of Panchayati Raj, to say that how this money has to be used. It's a development fund. How that development fund can be used for disaster risk reduction. Of course, many panchayats have been doing it. In fact, those panchayats which are supported by different disaster management authorities or CSOs, they have been doing it. I'll come back to that. In many states like MG and REGA, money is used for making elevated structures for rescue, and some cyclone shelters have been maintained from people's own money. Panchayats have been conducting owner-driven housing camps, how to build proper houses, safe houses. They're doing camps. And many panchayats I've seen, they have trained task forces. Yesterday, Mr. Paparsani had talked about that. Even the task forces ready at the Gram Panchayat level for early warning, rescue, first aid, all kinds of things. Of course, what I'm talking about is not uniform. This is not everywhere. These are anecdotal. And that's why I'm pleading for an institutionalization of the role of decentralized governance in DRR. The first case, I visited this place just second day of the cyclone Thane. This is in Tamil Nadu, Vellipuram district. I think the block is Kandamangalam. And here a group of panchayats who have been built capacity, they provide rescue support just before the cyclone struck. Then they immediately provide, there are no external agency. They provide water supply by pumping from because there's no electricity. So they provided a generator and provided water supply. And very interestingly, they have a damage assessment format ready. So immediately after this, they conducted the damage assessment. And they met the district collector and discussed with him. And GP, yesterday we were talking about restoration of electricity. This is the GP who basically, you can see the photographs in that corner. The GP restored the poles as well as the wires. Of course, they cannot restore the electricity link, but at least the poles and wire are restored. And this capacity was done by the Kalvi Kendra, the local NGO. So, given little capacity, panchayats can do extraordinary work. The second case I'm talking about is the Kesarganj block in Bahraich district of Uttar Pradesh. And this is Ghagra river, and every year they get floods. So they created real-time early warning system by linking a selected number of telephones of the panchayats to the district EOC, Emergency Operation Center, and their auto-dialed system. So immediately they get the early warning. After the early warning, you can see the corner photograph, the villagers with a microphone kind of disseminate the information, early warning. And they have trained task force about rescue. Very interestingly, they have a women task force for rescue. They said that women said that we know swimming because we are part of this flooding. So they have a women task force, and they got the training from Nauka Talim Kendra from Gujarat, all the way from Vadodara. And GSDMA that time supported that to provide that link. And they procured, there's a big boat, you can see mechanized boat. The panchayats have procured mechanized boats. Of course, this is part of an eco-funded project. But that the evaluation says that even after 10 years, the boats are operating because it's with panchayats. And when the collector requires these boats, the collector asks the panchayat to provide. It's real subsidiarity. What can be done at lower level, upper level, did not do. In fact, giving a boat to district authorities, it's a big burden to them. Panchayats are living near the riverbed, so if panchayats have all this equipment, they can easily provide upward. So, even the collector, in fact, Panchayat should have received this award. The collector that time, 10-11, he got the Times Impact Award for his, and they have used MG and NREG money to elevate the hand pumps. All their hand pumps are in elevated level. So these are some of the things which Panchayats have been doing for a long time. Third case is from Kutch, Bachau. This is, they have seen the disaster recovery, and this is earthquake, cyclone, drought, flooding, multi-disaster village. And they conduct regularly house construction, safe house construction camps. You can see that photograph. Their village, regularly they conduct it. And in fact, this is where we also work. We have a kind of a small campus where they come regularly for training. And these are demand-based training. These are not supply-based training. They demand that we require these trainings. And they also make task force. And the middle one photograph you can see, these are the Panchayat level task force people receiving training at GIDM, Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management. And NDRF is conducting the training program. So the higher level capacity is being directly given to Panchayats, and that's a demand. It's a demand-based training. It's not supply-based training. And school safety, I think yesterday Thiruji used that photograph also. This is from Gujarat. So school safety, also they have been actively engaged in. And this is the Panchayats, these are a group of Panchayats who have been using GPDP planning, Gram Panchayat Development Plan planning, to include the DRR issues. Because this is a, in fact, the Sarpanch himself made a presentation in NDMA and said that they require a boat. It's a desert area, but they get flash floods. So they require a boat. And now they have put up in their plan, from GPDP they will be buying a boat. So these are three cases. These cases you'll find everywhere. I'm just from 3 different regions provided 3 cases. But what is the relative advantage of PRIs in disaster risk reduction or building resilience? Disaster is, somebody said that disaster is most detailed at a micro level, and Panchayats witness these details. Once you come upwards, it becoming policies. The detail is lost. So the Panchayat continuously consult with the people on these details. So they can work on detail. Second one is, which one can criticize that National Disaster Management Plan doesn't talk about vulnerability reduction. But take, for example, a Panchayat, regularly they are finding out what is the requirement of vulnerable groups like women, SC, ST, persons with disability. So for each person's need, they can create their own plans. And so Panchayats can make very appropriate risk reduction activities in the daily activities. What Professor Ila Patnaik talked about, even during response fund or even development fund, that can be used for building resilience. And finally, it builds greater sense of ownership. Once Panchayat, take for example these boats, these rescue homes, shelter homes, those have owned, if they're owned by Panchayats, they can manage it well. And this is, and Panchayats, I personally feel that this is less politicized. If money is coming from center and state, this can be highly politicized. But resources in the hands of Panchayats can be less politicized. Politics is everywhere. It can be less politicized. So this is the relative advantage of PRIs in building resilience. Just let me quickly go through this. Democratic decentralization can happen not only by Panchayats, by devolution. It can happen through deconcentration, delegation, and privatization also, depending what kind you are doing. Take, for example, in Gujarat, we have created delegation.
Mr. Acharya?
Yeah. So let me skip that. So all 4 can be done. So I'm saying that we are now ready for decentralized governance in building resilience. And we have 25 years of experience, we have appropriate technological regime, and so I am making 5 recommendations. My first recommendation is, Prime Minister talked about 10-point agenda, point number 3, building women's leadership. You can only build women's leadership if you focus on panchayats. Today, almost all the states have made 50% reservation. We have 250,000 panchayats. Next time when you have such kind of platform, this hall will be filled with women. All the panels will be filled with women. So focus on panchayats, you'll have women leaders in DRR. And they will be doing all kinds of things, not only response, but also prevention and mitigation activities. Now, my number 2 is use all development fund for disaster risk reduction. In fact, Dr. Thirupugal this morning said, time will come that we don't require a disaster management authority. If all departments, all ministries do their little bit of disaster management authority is not required. But that's why I'm saying that for involvement of panchayats, MOPR need to be taken into convergence. And even if just we do the GPDP, Indira Awas schemes, now it is Prime Minister's Awas Yojana. Prime Minister Awas Yojana, if all the housing safeties are adhered to, will build a resilient society. That is Prime Minister's point 1 number agenda, and directly we can implement it. We need to document this experience of panchayats. Today, a lot of good work must be happening everywhere. In fact, every state I talk to, they give me a lot of stories. And perhaps we need to create a virtual learning space where such experiences can be collected. My 4th recommendation is PM's point number 8, building local capacity. I always say that आप पंचायत को जिम्मेदारी देंगे नहीं तो सीखेंगे कैसे? So we need to provide some more responsibility to panchayats. We have urban panchayats. These are cluster panchayats who are developing high quality infrastructure. So my point is management of these boards, management of the cyclone shelters, preparing a bridge. In panchayats is making a bridge in Assam. This is the middle photograph. So these kind of things doesn't belong to one panchayat. A couple of panchayats, a cluster of panchayats use it. So can we create, in fact, in Gujarat Panchayat Raja Act, there is a section 265 which talks about creating joint committees of various panchayats to manage these assets. I was talking to Rajasthan and they said that we don't have such kind of a clause. I don't know about other states. Perhaps we need to figure out whether our Panchayat Raj Act creates this provision. My last recommendation is building linkages. Can we create a local leaders platform? This is a national platform, but create a local leaders platform where these panchayat leaders, mostly women leaders, they'll come and talk about it. My point is governance can be only strengthened if there is collaborations. And let our panchayats collaborate with CSOs, corporate foundations, academic institutions, and government, and then we'll have a resilient society. Thank you.
Our third speaker of the session is Alpa, Sheth, and she will dwell on planning urban infrastructure. Ms. Alpa, Sheth.
Hi, good morning all. I'm going to talk on building resilient urban infrastructure, and my talk will be focused on 3 major aspects. One is understanding urban hazards, and also appreciating the gap between policies and the implementation at the field level of DRR. And then I'm going to conclude by suggesting some ways of improving urban resilience. I think one thing we all need to understand is that hazards are not static. They are continuously changing, and they're being reshaped by numerous issues, one of them being urbanization, and as we are seeing this huge process of urbanization, we are seeing changes in the densities, changes in the way we're using land, and that is having a great impact on how the hazard is changing. Then we're talking about climate change that you're seeing suddenly. You saw in Uttarakhand, you had a sudden landslide which happened with huge flooding. And you're also seeing cyclones which are caused because of climate change, floods, droughts, and so on. The planet is also, as we all know, heating up a lot, which is also causing forest fires and a lot of other environmental degradation. You have a lot of other industries which are coming up and causing disasters which we are still yet to comprehend the extent of the possibilities that they can come up with. I'd just like to bring this out right now as to the changes in the hazards that we are seeing, as everybody's been talking about the Sendai framework. And the point number 4 of the 7 global targets that are mentioned in the Sendai framework is that the ambition or the aim is to reduce substantially damage and increase resilience, especially to critical infrastructure such as schools and hospitals. And then ironically, just as we speak, the last weekend, what we saw was we had a cyber attack, and it spread simultaneously to 100 countries, and the most affected was the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, and 48 of those organizations were disrupted. And this caused a pause in surgeries and appointments, consultations for the next 3 days in the United Kingdom. So I think the point which we need to understand is that hazards are changing. One more hazard which we are all seeing suddenly is terrorism, and again, that has been changing color, and now you're seeing more and more the lone wolf kind of hazards, and also cyber attacks, which are all very low cost and high impact, and what you would call, the fat tail events. You're also seeing some really, as one would call black swan events. So I think we need to be far more nuanced in understanding hazards and not just look at hazards as hazards which are going to cause problems to the hardware that we have. That was there, that was the past, but it is changing, and the nature of hazards is changing. And I think one thing we should think about as disaster management agencies are here, and we're talking about disaster risk reduction, that in the United States, they have the Department of Homeland Security, and that looks at hazards, which are not just the geophysical hazards, but they're looking at terrorism, they're looking at cyber terrorism, they're looking at immigration hazards, border security. So it's really one body which has about 22 different agencies, federal agencies, which are part of it, and it covers the entire umbrella, so so to say, of hazards. I think, unfortunately, today what is happening is that it's quite fragmented in our country. So all of the agencies we are talking about today may not directly be involved in terrorism hazards or in cyber hazards and so on. And maybe it's time for us to think about a more comprehensive way of looking at risk reduction. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this because for me, the biggest concern is we really are not looking at hazards and urban hazards in the way it needs to be looked at. And I'm sure some of you have read Daniel Kahneman's book, and Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think that, we tend to always be in this thinking fast kind of a mode, and it possibly may not work in all situations. And sure, when you're doing disaster response, that's going to be the way we're going to do it. But when we are looking at disaster risk reduction, we need to be looking at a slow thinking, a more complex way of looking at issues. And we all suffer from this fallacy of, as what Kahneman says, is YCRT. YCRT is what you see is all there is. So our response and our entire approach to disaster mitigation is looking at what we know and trying to find disaster risk reduction techniques for what we know. And I think what happens is really there are three types of risks that we're kind of having to grapple with, which is, one is the known. We know the kind of hazards there are, and we know the way we would need to respond to them. And we're all very comfortable with that, whether it's, these are typically the droughts, the cyclones, and so on. Then you have the known unknowns. For example, we know that there is an earthquake risk, and